Ah, The Innocents. I'd never seen this one until recently, but had heard a lot about it. Almost universally positive, so I definitely had high expectations. It's based on the book The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, and a stage play that had come after the book. The story is about a governess, Miss Giddens, played by Deborah Carr, who takes a job looking after two children, Flora and Miles. Their uncle, Michael, is a rich playboy type who doesn't have the time or the inclination to deal with the kids, which were left in his care after their parents died, so he basically hires out help to raise them so that he could live his life without having to deal with them at all. As Miss Giddens arrives in the house and meets the children, as well as the maid, Mrs. Goose, she becomes increasingly certain that the house is haunted by the ghosts of the former governess, Miss Jessel, and her boyfriend, Quint, both of whom had died on the premises. She also becomes increasingly suspicious of the children, who at first seem perfect and wonderful, but upon closer inspection are creepy and unnerving, and they seem to know things that they shouldn't. For example, near the beginning of the film, the boy, Miles, is away at school, so she only meets Flora, who keeps announcing that Miles is coming home, despite no such thing being planned. However, the very next day, news arrives that he had been expelled from school, and he arrives. As the film goes on, the children became less like children and more like little sinister adults, and Miss Giddens has more and more sightings of mysterious figures on the grounds, faces in the windows, and hands in the lake. As the film goes on, the ghost sightings become more obvious and numerous, and she starts hearing whispering voices everywhere. She becomes convinced that Miss Jessel and Quint had been lovers in life, and in death they are attempting to reunite and continue their relationship by possessing the children. As time goes on, all of the evidence seems to support her theories, and she has the maid convinced. But about 3/4 through the movie, the entire tone starts to change. The children, formerly creepy and sinister, start to seem more sympathetic, and I started to think that they weren't evil, just a little strange after having witnessed a few tragic events, and having their parents die and being left in the care of an uncle who doesn't care about them. Miss Giddens starts off seeming like the sanest, most rational person ever, whose suspicions rise slowly until she's finally convinced something supernatural is going on. But towards the end, she seems more frantic and deluded, and does some extremely creepy things herself. For example, she seems unnaturally fixated on Miles, and vice versa. But what comes off as a creepy obsession on the boy's part eventually seems like a harmless crush. And Miss Giddens seems more and more like a sexual predator as the film goes on. By the end, you realize that nobody but Giddens has copped to actually seeing the ghosts, though she's convinced the children have seen them and they're lying about it, and that the entire thing will end if they admit the truth. But she winds up frightening and traumatizing them by forcing them to relive the trauma of witnessing these deaths. However, the movie plays it ambiguous. Like the novel it was based on, the movie never outright says whether there really are ghosts or whether Miss Giddens is insane. And based on watching the movie, it seems both interpretations are equally valid. Personally, I think she's insane, and there never were any ghosts, but I could totally understand interpreting it otherwise, and that she's made to look crazy by the ghosts selectively showing themselves to her. The author of the original novel intended for the ending to be interpreted by the imagination of the reader, and this is a very difficult thing to do in a film. People usually want real answers, and there's been no drought of people overanalyzing every single scene in this film to determine which interpretation is true. But they miss the point that ambiguity is the point of the story. It's sort of like a way more recent film, Inception, which had a purposefully ambiguous ending, but it doesn't stop people from discussing it to no end. And really, that is the mark of a really brilliant film, that people are still discussing it and analyzing it over 50 years later. And brilliant is really the best word that I could use to describe The Innocents. Every single aspect of the film fires on all cylinders. The acting is fantastic, the cinematography is beautiful, and the direction is masterful. And really the best thing of all is the one thing that very few people talk about or even notice when they're watching a film, the lighting, which especially in a black and white film plays an incredibly important role in building tension, especially in a horror film or a psychological thriller as the case may be. And in the case of The Innocents, it is both of these things. The film is full of a lot of really subtle themes, and I think that it's the sort of movie that'll get better with each viewing. If you go into it with the mindset that the house is definitely haunted, it's one type of film. But if you go into it thinking that the main character is a dangerously insane sexual predator of children, it takes on an entirely different level of horror, perhaps a far more real and pressing horror. I can't recommend this movie enough. It's pretty much perfect, and I'm quite happy to give it a 10 out of 10.